Get ready.
Hi, my name's Kaz Riley, and this is Trancing in the Sheets. And I've got something really wonderful and a little bit different for you today. I have the wonderful Joseph Onesta from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who is quite unique in many ways in that he is both an ordained minister and a hypnotherapist. And for many people, those two things don't always seem to go together. But you'll see in just a moment just how beautifully it does and all the wonderful work that Joseph does. So thank you so much, Joseph, for coming on the show today.
I am so excited to be here. This is a joy for me.
So, Joseph, tell us, how does a person end up being an ordained minister and a hypnotherapist? Let's start there.
Oh, that's a great question. The ordained minister happened when I was very, very young. I was in college. I fell into the Jesus movement and got very, very involved. I had my own little conflict in that I was gay, and I tried to deny that for many, many years. I spent a lot of time praying for God to take it away, and that didn't happen. But I went as far as ordination, and it just got a little sticky at that point. And I tried to step down from the ministry. They wouldn't let me do it. So I'm still ordained and I'm still active. I have done pastoral counseling for the last 30 years, and whenever people have asked for it. The hypnotist part was in the 1990s. I was working at a place called AIDS Project Los Angeles, and 2,000 of my clients were dying of AIDS within 2 years. And we had 2 volunteer hypnotists. One is now passed on. The other is still active. You may know him, Timothy Trujillo. He's a great guy. And I had been bullied most of my life as growing up. And the other hypnotist, Francis, gave me a little session to help me deal with my past. And many years, I thought it was, to be honest, I thought it was BS. I thought it was pointless. I thought it was silly. I believed that I was awake the whole time, and walked out of there thinking, well, if the clients like her, that's all that matters. And then 25 years later, old high school acquaintance called me up, tried to ask me to forgive him for all the abuse he heaped on me because he was in a 12-step program. And it was at that point, Kaz, that I realized that what we had done in hypnosis those years ago actually worked. I could not actually recall any single event of abuse, although I could recall being the condition of abuse, but I couldn't even recall who done it. And to me, that was a miracle. And I had to come out of the closet, which sort of took me out of the ministry. And when I realized that hypnosis had worked, I thought, gosh, this is something I could do until I'm dead and be happy to do it because it works. And, if you have the right mix, the right therapist and the right client, boy, does it work wonders.
It is it's just one of the best jobs in the world, isn't it? It is actually a calling, I believe. We talk about a job and a profession, but I think for many of us, it's just simply who we are, isn't it? Being a hypnotist and a hypnotherapist, it runs that deep.
Yeah, in the ministry, we say people who earn their income outside the church, we say we're bivocational. I guess we're all a little bi, but bivocational. And so I never made money as a pastor. I didn't even get paid. I just worked. But this was something that I could do that was very, very wonderful in helping people. A lot of people, particularly in the evangelical spectrum, have a hard time reconciling hypnosis with Christianity simply because they think it's mind control and in some circles tantamount to the installation of demons, like we're somehow opening ourselves up to, Satan himself or so. It's ridiculous, by the way. I can give you a little Bible lesson that has hypnosis in it if you'd like.
That would be wonderful.
Okay, so the Apostle Paul in the book of Romans um, wrote that we should be transformed by the renewing of our minds. And the wonderful thing is every hypnotist who hears that says, well, of course, we renew the mind and we are transformed. A lot of Christians think that he means the conscious mind, but that's ridiculous. A little later in the book of Romans, he says, the very things I don't want to do, I still do, and the things that I do want to do, I don't do. Oh, woe is me, he says. Now, honestly, if he had known about hypnosis, that we could work and we could help that unconscious part of his mind to just accept the change and accept the shift. I have pastors who come to me for pornography addiction, and I have people who call me up in absolute desperation because all they're getting from their pastor is, well, let's pray about it. And for these people to call me, it's virtually an act of desperation and a certain degree of open-mindedness. So I'm quite tickled.
I think it is, and I think I think it's wonderful that people are because this idea that people who are within a church or within a religious group don't, especially when it comes to things like pornography, sexuality, sensuality, sex, often there's so much shame and guilt attached to that within those kinds of groups. And I always say I'm not religious shaming, I'm not a religious person, but it comes part and parcel quite often, I think. And what that stops people doing often is either asking for help or seeking help or even admitting that that's there. And then of course that guilt and shame is actually very, very detrimental to people's lives. So Absolutely. I know, one of the reasons that I asked you, to come and take part with this today, and I'm so grateful that you have, Joseph, is because I know you do that work. I know you do the work with, people that do have a pornography addiction who, I also know that you work so compassionately with parents that have children that are homosexual and they're having a really hard time with it to the point they're asking for conversion therapy. And I think it takes such a great depth of understanding to help people get essentially over some of the beliefs that they've held that they, for many, many, many years, sometimes a lifetime, that's so attached to their religion and who they are. So tell us about that kind of work that you do, because it is done so compassionately and with such love, and it's so important, I think.
Now, several times a year, Kaz, I'll get a call from a parent who is just completely distraught over the sexuality of their child. And we have to understand two things. First of all, for that person to call me, they have to be a little bit open-minded, at least, and absolutely desperate, because church doesn't have the answer for that. And it's unfortunate that they don't, but they don't. And in fact, one of the last times I sat and talked with another pastor about my own sexuality, he actually said to me that I was the first gay man that he had ever met that wasn't a sex addict. And I just looked at him and I said, that's because those are the only ones desperate enough to talk to you, because they know what they're going to get. Oh, well, we have to pray out this demon or something like that. For heaven's sakes, if you had a little compassion, it just might happen. And they might be a little bit more open, and you might not lose these people in your congregation, because they lose them all the time. But these parents who are calling me up, they're absolutely desperate. And I've shared this experience with other hypnotists, and sometimes they'll say, oh, just tell them they're off, or, no, if you approach a person from that angle and you're a little bit aggressive with them, excuse me, I just have to check my connections because it's telling me my battery is low for some odd reason.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay, so it should be all right. I hope so. Anyway, because I'm plugged in, I don't know what else to do. Um, okay. So, and I apologize for that.
No, don't worry.
The, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
So
Can you put me back?
we were talking about compassion, treating people with compassion, and the parents that call you up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're calling me up, and you understand that in terms of their doctrine, if they have something wrong, that could mean the difference between heaven and hell. They believe they have to believe the right thing. And having to accept that they've gotten something wrong is frightful, absolutely frightening to them. So I approach them with absolute compassion. And one of the first things I'll say to them is, you know, you cannot possibly love your child more than God does. Do you want to put your child in hell? Do you think your child deserves hell? And you know, parents will say, well, the Bible. I'm not asking you about the Bible. I'm asking you to express what you think about this. And they usually are in very much confusion about that issue because they don't want to say anything that's going to jeopardize their relationship with God. At the same time, for many of them, God is just this sort of taskmaster ogre that wants to order people's lives in such a way that they're not actually effectively living. And you know, bit by bit, if I'll spend all the time I need to or all the time that I can with a parent who has that struggle. And I've had parents insist that I take on their children, and I explain to them, look, you know, 30 years in the ministry, and I have never met any single person who ever changed their sexuality. I've met people who've lived double lives. I've met people who've suppressed their sexuality to the point of being a eunuch. I've met people who engaged in unloving marriages or at least unsexually satisfying marriages for the sake of propriety. I've met people who were effectively the closest thing that we have that I've met, that people that I've met that say, okay, I was this and now I'm not, are bisexual people who were genuinely bisexual and made a committed choice to one person who conveniently was a person of the opposite sex. And so, and they may have chosen between two, and they'll say, well, and this is where they get the idea that homosexuality is a choice. For heaven's sakes, nobody, I mean, I'm very happy being a gay man, but I'm not, certainly given the time that I grew up, I wouldn't have chosen this at all. So the idea that a person can be gay and be taught or even hypnotized out of being gay, I mean, you can, stage hypnosis demonstrates that people are willing to do things in hypnosis beyond what they would normally do if they didn't have a drink or two in, quite frankly. You know, we just lose that little bit of inhibition. So, and we're learning today with all of the new gender sex definitions that there's a lot more fluidity than perhaps we've been able to realize. So with all of that fluidity and all, you know, all right, but we can help people accept themselves better, live happier lives, and not be afraid that, you know, God is somehow standing up there angry over who happens to be in my bed. I was in a Christian men's group. I'm sorry if I'm monopolizing.
No, that's why we're here. That's why we're here. That's exactly why we're here.
I was in a Christian men's group, and the leader of that men's group knew that I was gay, but no one else did, simply because they don't like to publish that we have gay people in our church. And he came to the group, and he was telling us how his daughter had come out as lesbian. And he was in complete turmoil. Well, I had to step into that ministerial position in my own heart, whether he liked it or not. I had to do it. And the thing that got his attention more than anything was, I said, I don't know why people fixate on who I have in my bed. Quite frankly, I never think of who you have in your bed. If I know your wife, and if I don't entertain that thought at all. It's none of my business who you're with or what you're doing. I said, but let me say something to you. When you think of me and my husband with, in bed together, that makes you a little sick, doesn't it? Well, quite frankly, I feel the same way if I think about you and your wife. It's just not something that's inside me. And there's a Bible verse that says, that Christians often use. It says that these men have exchanged natural love, their natural inclination of love for women, for love for men. There's a Bible verse that says, I'm paraphrasing. Well, the key is the natural inclination. If my natural inclination is for men, I haven't exchanged anything. In fact, if I were to marry a woman, I would have been committing that problem. So accept who I am, accept who God is. When I was I've always been a little bit rebellious.
I can't imagine that.
When I was in college, I was in a young men's home Bible study group. Excuse me, I just kicked my camera. And they were talking about the sin of masturbation. And I lived in a house of 8 Christian men, in their 19, 20-year-old men, who were all masturbating, but nobody would talk about it or know about it or acknowledge about it. And they were telling us this terrible, terrible sin of masturbation. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, there are people being murdered at this moment. There are people being held captive, tied to radiators in the basement. There are people being tortured at this moment. And if you think you're going to tell me that God is on his throne, arms crossed like this, because little Johnny is having a wank in the shower, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
So, okay, I've always been a little rebellious. But, if you're not a clear thinker person, you just give that over to someone else. This is why I think they think that it's mind control. This is what they've done. Many people in their church, they accept whatever the pastor says, just speaking it out, and oh yes, and they'll quote the pastor more often than the Bible. And quite frankly, I don't have a lot of time for that, but I'll take all of the time I need to help a parent discover and not torment their child with their own prejudice.
And it is. I mean, a lot of those prejudice are learned prejudice, aren't they? And it's about, sadly, I think it's about what other people will think. So it's about, how the family may be judged, if it's, and this is where, for many years, obviously homosexuality was classed as being a mental illness, but that came from the teachings before that. And now thankfully, the certainly the psychological society has kind of woke up and changed all of that. But of course, this is about people loving people. It's not about sin, it's about love, isn't it? And that's the place that we need to help people get to, I think.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, here in the United States, there, way back in the 16 and 1700s, there were a bunch of people that were so fundamentalist that they didn't feel they could stay in England, and they got on a boat and came over here. And those are the Puritans, right? We call them Puritans. And we've inherited this sort of puritanical mentality. I mean, if you look at our own political system, the marriage between evangelical or fundamental Christianity and politics is so ingrained, and people vote because of their religion without thinking about what that person without being political, I don't think that Donald Trump's life is the Christian example of propriety or piety by any stretch of the imagination, even as he continues unabashedly. So to see a photograph of him surrounded by evangelical ministers as they're laying hands on him is just, in my mind, the biggest absurdity on the planet. And without judging him as president, even just his character, this is something that if anybody acted like that in a Christian church, they would be addressed. They would just be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those. I think this is it, isn't it? And this, as we kind of come back to the work that you do, this is why it's so important, because I think it helps people to see, you are, a living, breathing example of, of somebody that can have both religion, spirituality, can be gay, and can show compassion to people that aren't necessarily compassionate to, to kind of all, to that kind of mixture of things. And I think that takes a great strength, Joseph, to do that and to continue to do that repeatedly to people, and then still be there, because I'm guessing there will be those parents that, will never accept that. But then what the message that you give to that child is that it's okay to be them. And hopefully
Absolutely.
that saves them from a lot of turmoil and torment. And, and obviously they can still have their religion. They can still be a Christian. They can still have that love for God, but also have the love for themselves as they truly are.
I had one woman call me about her son. Now he was of age and chose to come for anxiety, ostensibly, and the mother had called me first, and I actually pointed out to her that perhaps her judgment of him was the biggest source of his anxiety. Now we worked together, he and I, for about 10 sessions. And which is a long time for me, by the way. I hardly ever get that far. We usually are done well before that. But I was able to help him go through all of the questions he had about himself. We even went through 2 or 3 sessions. He was wondering if perhaps he would be happier as a woman. And it's like, I've had transgender clients before, and I hear a kind of, like, when I ask them, how do you know that, you're a man in a woman's body? How do you know this? And one of the most powerful things that I've ever heard one of my clients say is, well, when I was a little girl, I always thought I would grow up to be a man. And I can embrace that. That's wonderful. But this young man, who was very inexperienced, very tormented, close with his mother, but tormented by her insistence, and he dared to ask this question. And I said, well, what makes you think that you're going to be any happier as a woman than you are as a man? What we really need to focus on is the acceptance of yourself. If you, at that point, because I didn't hear from him that he always thought he'd grow up to be a woman, although that's not the only criteria, but to accept and love himself and embrace himself. And when I first came out of the closet, some Christians would confront me and say, how do you justify your faith with your sexuality? And I would just look at them and say, I have the problem. I don't have to. I don't see the conflict. You're the one with the conflict. Go figure it out. You want to talk about the Bible? I was kind of militaristic at that point, but go figure it out. I'm not the one with the issue. You are. And, they didn't like that. They would walk away saying, oh, he's lost. Turn or burn, But that's not the way it works. No. That's not, And so if I get the chance to work with the young person, my goal is, sometimes people are a little confused, and sometimes they're doing things that are fashionable. I don't know if you've ever met a young transgendered person who was thinking about this because it was fashionable to be transgender. I don't understand that, but okay. And if that's what you want, take it slow.
Okay.
There are plenty of.
I think, when people start using terms like it's a fashionable thing to be, actually what it means is that usually it's become suddenly more accepted. So people are more comfortable in being able to express who they are in different ways, isn't it? And, when we see a trend, so it's not a trend as in it's become trendy to be transgender, it just simply means that the trend of acceptance and being able to speak about it more has come along. And therefore more people are more comfortable doing that. Therefore there suddenly seems to be this massive increase in a particular thing, when actually it's just that it's always been there. It's just that people are able to speak about it. And I think with any kind of sexual issue or any kind of sensuality or sexual thing, it's my niche area, is that it's not that suddenly it's become trendy to do X, Y, and Z. I'm a kink-friendly therapist. It's not suddenly that it's suddenly become trendy to be kinky. It's simply that people are allowed to speak about this more because
Yes.
it's become more acceptable and there's a better knowledge base. And with that, obviously, comes some resistance because sex scares people. It's a taboo subject. Sex and death are the most taboo subjects on the planet. And yet they're the two things that apply to just about everybody. Certainly the death does. But, and I think that's probably where it is, isn't it? Is that, this idea that it's not like trying on a different pair of dungarees. This is about people being able to show people who they truly are. And often, they've been hiding it for many, many years. And especially transgender, they've literally been living in the wrong body. I mean, how traumatic and horrible must that be?
When I was working at AIDS Project Los Angeles back in the 1990s, it was my first exposure to transgendered people. And I will tell you that I found, in general, them to be the most self-reflective and self-aware people on the planet. And my life was completely changed by a 6'4" transgendered woman named Chantel. I can tell you, it's a cute little story. I was working in this program, and at the time it was mostly gay men in a very bad mood because they had a 2-year death sentence and they were just in a bad mood. Mm. And I was already bald. I was fat. And I did not have a huge amount of self-esteem. And they were just mean to me, complaining about everything. And I was sort of a cross between a cruise ship director and Mother Teresa. I had this little social educational program where, we did activities and things. And one day, this woman named Chantel, 6'4", I don't know how to translate that into centimeters, but she was really tall. And she said, "Joseph, I need to speak with you." And she was moving her hand back and forth like this. And I said, okay. I thought she was going to complain. We went over to my cubicle. She said, and can I use slightly strong language?
You can say whatever you like on this show. Anything at all. Yeah.
She leaned over to me and she said, "Listen to me, Joseph. These bitches are going to chew you up and spit you out. You need to stand up, girl." Now, I had no idea what that meant. I just knew she wasn't complaining. And I said, "Oh, thank you for the feedback, Chantel. Thank you so much." And I'm trying to get around her. 6'4". She was built, think of the widest rugby player you'd ever seen in your life. She's big. She was never going to be more to anybody than a man in a dress, except that she was a woman.
We have a phrase for that kind of build here. Do you want to hear what it is?
Yeah.
The phrase that we use here for somebody that's solid and has some kind of presence and big and strong, which is kind of what you're describing, is built like a brick shit house, built like an outside.
She was a brick house. Absolutely. And when I tried to get around her, she said, ah! She wouldn't let me go anywhere. She said, look at me. And she had this big square old face that pockmarks from acne when she was young. She said, look at me. Do you think I could live my life, without having to talk with myself once in a while? And I just said, no, ma'am, because she had it rough. She said, whenever any of these bitches has anything to say to you that doesn't begin with the word please or end with the words thank you, you should be telling yourself these words: I am fabulous. When you wake up in the morning, the first words out of your mouth, I am fabulous. When you look at yourself in the mirror, I am fabulous. When you step outside your door to greet the day, I am fabulous. She said, Joseph, let me be the first to tell you, I think you are fabulous. And she walked away. I could still tell you what she was wearing. It was a chiffon blouse with big hibiscus flowers on it, a pencil skirt, and yellow flip-flops with daisies on the toes. And her heels were cracked and dry. And she completely changed my life. That found its way into my psyche. It made everything better. And it took a 6'4" transgendered woman named Chantel to put that in me. A couple of years later, I was doing a different job, and I was teaching people at a corporation about credit card problems. Mm-hmm. And a person stood up in the back and said, Joseph, do you remember me? And I did. It wasn't Chantel. Everybody thinks it was Chantel off the top, but it wasn't her. It was a guy. And he said about my program, he said, I believe I'm alive today because of the man standing in front of this room. He created a program at AIDS Project Los Angeles that gave me a reason to live. He is fabulous. And when he said the word fabulous, I will tell you, Chantel, who had actually passed away by that time, I could just see her in the heavens going, I told you, girl.
There you go. And and here's another girl that thinks you are completely fabulous, Joseph. I just love the way that you work. I think it's such a valuable thing to the world. I know I've often said that we need more people in the world like you, and I really, truly, and genuinely mean that. And sadly, we're out of time, but I know I'm gonna reel you back in for another episode, because
absolutely,
the one of the episodes that I really want to cover is the transgender community, because it's so misunderstood, and just therapy and things that can be done to help people through that transition, I think is so powerful, especially with hypnosis. So where can people find you? What's your kind of websites and contacts? Where can we get hold of you?
My website is Mind Power Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh has an H at the end. So it's mindpowerpittsburgh.com. It's easy to find. My name is Joseph Onesta, Onesta. So you can either just Google me or go to mindpowerpittsburgh.com, and that's just the easiest way to get a hold of me. If you have any questions, that's great.
That's wonderful. We'll make sure that information's attached to this when it airs. So thank you so much for spending some time with me today, Joseph. I always enjoy it, and think the absolute world of you.
I can't wait to see you, and I think the world of you too. I'll see you in August, if not before.
You certainly will. You certainly will. So if you're enjoying Trancing in the Sheets, this is season 2 here on the Hypnosis 24/7 Live Network. Don't forget that from the 13th of January, we're also airing on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV, which is exciting for this girl in Yorkshire. And, we cover all kinds of topics. And, please get in touch with me if there's a topic that you would particularly like us to cover, or if you've got any questions about hypnosis, then, drop me a line. You can get me on most social media platforms with the handle @TransingSheets. You can also get me on my YouTube channel on Trancing in the Sheets. And, you can put comments in any of the places that you might find me in the box below, and I do get back to people. So thank you so much for joining us here on Trancing in the Sheets. My name's Kaz Riley. I'm the founder of Sexual Freedom Hypnosis, and I look forward to speaking with you all again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Get ready.